All right, so last time when we were playing in this, you guys started modeling your own stuff. Here's my substance item. It's gorgeous. There he is. Cool. I do not believe I showed Iray in here. No? Okay. So inside substance, you could actually render stuff right inside it. So if we were doing a still image, you could render right through substance. So if I click this button, it brings open Iray, and what happens is we get basically an environment, and then we get a light in the scene, and we get some nice overall effects. Okay, so now you can see the object, and I can even spin around to get, you know, the perfect view for this thing. Wonderful, right? The way that Iray works, so you remember Cinema, you remember Maya before, basically you would set parameters that would say I want this many samples or this many passes or whatever. Iray works based on samples, so you see here there's a sample number, but it also works with time. So I could say right now my samples over there are set to 1,000, okay, so it's going to try to render out 1,000 samples for this. Now if it doesn't reach, if it reaches 1,000 samples, then that's as good as it's going to get. Below that is the max time. So with max time, it's only going to render for 10 seconds per frame, okay, and then it's just going to stop, right? So if it hits 10 seconds and it hasn't hit 1,000 samples, it will stop. If it hits 1,000 samples but it hasn't been 10 seconds, it'll stop, okay? So you have these two areas where you can play with the quality of it. The more time you put into it, the better it's going to look, the better it could look. Not will look, but could look. You could also pause it, so sometimes you may not want it to constantly update. You'll see that as I move around, it gets really pixelated, and then I let go, and then there it goes. Now if you look right there, you see the iterations, and then here's the time. Which one do you think is going to get to first? Time, right? So 10 seconds. So that's a good gauge to look at to say, I want this to look better. Should I adjust the samples or should I adjust the time? Which one do you think? Time, right? We add more time, then we can have more samples, okay? So if I took this up to 20 seconds or 30 or whatever. For a preview, which is what we're currently doing, that's all we need to worry about is just keeping it low, keeping it at the default, maybe even going lower if we had a more complex model, but that should be good. You'll see that this even goes up to hours, so if you had something that's even more high res, you may need something that goes up that high. Our environment map right here is a panorama, and you can choose a different one. So if you wanted something specific, you can go, I want it there, or I want it with some studio lighting. If you remember from the intro class, we did a keyshot assignment, right? We brought our drone into keyshot. This is just like keyshot-ish, okay? So you can have your different backgrounds here. Eventually we'll get into making our own panoramics, so you can see how to make these and see what you can do with them. That's cool. Obviously, the lighting in those HDRs, in those environment maps, plays a huge role in how our object looks. Specifically, if we don't choose a good enough background for it, we're not going to pick up reflections or refractions or any of the stuff that would go into making this object look as good as we want it to look. You can change the exposure, meaning brighten it up or dim it down. You could rotate it so you can spin it around. You can go to the dome properties, play with the settings. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of them. Play with the settings. What else? Scroll that up. We have depth of field too. So if I take this aperture up, what's going to happen is I'm going to start to introduce depth of field. Who knows what depth of field is? Right? Most of you should know what depth of field is. If you take a picture with an actual camera, typically you're going to get something in focus here and then something out of focus there, or depending on how you have your settings, the other way, okay? So depth of field will emulate that. So as I crank this up, I'll introduce a little bit of it, so 0.01, a little bit of depth of field. As I get further and further and further, we're getting more depth of field added to this. Typically, like your phone doesn't really have like a good depth of field to it. It's kind of like just like a flat image, but it can do some fake stuff. But typically this makes your images look more realistic because you have that depth of field. It also helps make them pop more because your item is usually pretty clear in the front, maybe a little bit softer on the edges, and then the background is just a bit more soft. Now that looks pretty junky because we can't even see our item. It doesn't know what we're focusing on, okay? So that's where we could change this focus distance and get it exactly where we want it. Now they have this where we could just type it in if we knew the value, and then I believe control middle mouse, boom, okay? And so what that's going to do is where I hit the control key and hit the middle mouse button, make sure I'm recording still. Yes, okay. It's going to find the actual depth from my camera to that item of where that item is, and then it sets that to my focus distance, okay? Now that still looks pretty horrible because it's like still way too much stuff. So I'm going to take this aperture down some, okay? So basically I just have too much stuff there. All right. I could also play with the field of view just to help kind of emphasize, you know, the end look of my scene. Control middle click on this again. Take this down even further. There you go. So now you can see how we have basically a nice crisp line coming down the center, like right about here. And then we're kind of feathered off to the side. Now all that grain that's right there, that's where we would go up to the top where we have samples, and we could take the time up, and it's going to look a lot nicer. We could also activate some post effects. So we can do things like vignetting. Oops, sorry, nope. Not in here. We have to do that in a different spot. All right, there we go. Cool. All right, so there's the Iray part of this. So our Thor hammer, we're going to do that inside of here. I just want to preview it because it's a good way to be able to see your stuff, especially seeing it, you know, at different angles or whatever. It's super awesome. Now, just to warn you, this is crazy intense on your laptop if you have a laptop. It's crazy intense on your regular computer if you have a regular computer. The first time I went into Iray on this laptop, the whole thing just shut down because it was getting way too hot. Yeah. But that was because I had bad stuff inside. They fixed it and everything's good. All right. So I'm just going to switch back to Substance. Whoops, not there. Cool. So this is the other thing I want to show you. Here's my viewers or display settings. So this is the stuff I was playing with. There's never a good spot for this. There we go. This is the stuff I was playing with in the other one where you can get some other nice effects. So I can activate some post effects inside here. So you see these edges, how like pixelated they are. If I turn on anti-aliasing, it'll smooth those out. Okay, I can open up the settings. Nope, there's nothing there. Some of these will have parameters that we can play with. Here's vignette, so I'll turn that on. Pull that down. Let me go to just a 3D view. Cool. We can do depth of field inside here. So this is more of like a, it's using the same settings as the other one. There we go. But it's not as accurate as the other one. We can do some tone mapping, so we're adjusting some of our colors. Oops. That's why it's not working. There we go. We can do some glare. Okay, so we want our object, oh, a little bit too much bling. There we go. To have a little bit of shine to it, we can do that. We can do some lens distortion. And again, I have to control click that thing. Come on. There we go. It took a second for it to calculate where it was at. There we go. So even without actually rendering out your object, you can still create a pretty decent looking item inside of Substance, okay? So that's pretty neat. And what's cool is that this is in real time, so there's no like updating, right? Like the other one, it did the fuzzy thing and then it came into this. This is like a real-time way to kind of look at your item around it. Okay. Now, a warning, when we take this from Substance and we bring this into Maya, it's not going to look exactly like we're seeing it. Substance still has an environment that it's projecting. That's how we're getting reflections over here. Okay? So when we bring it in there, it's going to look different. Alright? So I need to export my texture out. So I'm going to go to File, Export Textures. And what this is going to set up is where you're taking your textures to. Okay? So just like before when we started, we said PBR, algorithmic, blah, 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 whatever that was. This is going to basically take all of our stuff out. Okay? If we were going into Maya, you'll see that there is no Maya specific one. There is an Arnold one, which is what we're going to be rendering these stills in. So we could try that. These are all presets too. So you could literally just like make your own presets. Here's V-Ray. Here's Unity. There's Unreal. Okay. There's Keyshot. So I'm just going to go to the default one. It says document channels plus normal, no alpha. Actually, I need an alpha. And then this is where my stuff is saved. So remember before I said we can change the size of our textures, right? Here's where we can do it. Right at the end, we can say 4096. That's the kind of texture I want. I'm going to export this out. Oops, it's going into my Documents Substance Painter. I forgot to click that button. It's saving it as a ping, and it's making them 8 bits. Some rendering engines don't like pings. Some don't like TIFFs. Some don't like PSDs. Most don't like PSDs. Some don't like JPEGs. Okay? So with every one, just save it as something, put it in there, and then you'll know what it's supposed to be. I'm pretty sure Arnold is fine with PNGs. So I'm going to open up my item. Now notice how I'm setting my project, just like we talked about last time. There it is. Not sure why this window is so huge. And let's save that. Continue. Alright, there's my cube. Just that one. Alright, export successful. Alright, so here's what we get out of this. Remember we hit the C key, and we can see the base color, the height, the roughness, the metallic, the normal. Okay? So all of those maps, that's what we can just get out of this. So we got 7 maps out of here that we're going to bring into Maya. So I'm going to cut these, Control X, and I'm going to put these into my P drive here, 2520. And every time we use images that we're bringing into Maya, they go into source images. When we take stuff out of Maya, it'll go into regular images. Okay? I'm just going to delete those ones, so don't confuse me. Alright, so you'll see the name. Base color, height, metallic, mixed AO, normal, normal, normal direct, and then roughness. Just so I can see what each one of these is going to do, I could open Photoshop, but I'm just going to show you Nuke just so you can see the interface of it. We will get into Nuke further, but I really like Nuke for being able to just visualize stuff. Just visually like see all my stuff at one point. Alright, so here's the interface. Here's what we see. Okay, so when we're looking at stuff, here's where we typically work is this, and then these are properties. Okay, so I'm going to take my images here and just drag them into this node graph area. Alright, so you see all of my images here. If I want to look at one of them, just like Maya, I can zoom in and out. The keys are a little bit different. Alt and middle mouse button is my zoom, and Alt and right mouse button is my toggle. You can't orbit obviously down there, but that's what it is. If I want to see one of these specifically up here, I just click on it and hit 1. Okay, so now this is the height map. So we can see from here, there's no real data in this. It's basically just one solid color, just this red. So I'm most likely not going to use this height map. Here's my roughness map. I'm going to click on it and hit 1. All right, there's definitely some data inside here. So I'll be using that. Here's my color. Hit 1. Here is my mixed AO. You'll see that there's nothing inside here. There's a little bit. If you look at that red number right there, as I move my mouse around, it's actively reading all my values. So you see how it's kind of flickering in some spots? So it is picking something up. We may use that. We'll find out. Oops, I'll just set that here for now. Here is my metallic. Yep, there's that. Here is my regular normal. And again, there are some values here. It is doing something. But I think this other normal will probably be the better one. Either one of those is hard to see. The DirectX one I think is the one we want to use. Okay. So this is why I like this, because I can easily switch between all of these. In Photoshop, sometimes it gets crazy with all the tabs on top and everything else. Okay. So let's go back to Maya. There we go. All right. So now we're using Arnold for this. So I'm just going to delete out all this other stuff or hide the other stuff just so I don't have to look at it. All right. So I just threw it on a layer and I just have this one item. I'll reset it back down there. All right. So Arnold has its own materials, okay? If we were in Cinema, we basically used the default material that was there and modify that. Arnold is very similar to that. You use the base material, and then you add all your stuff to this base material, okay? So I right-click on it. I go to Assign New Material. Do that again. There we go. And you'll see this is all the different materials that we can add to this, okay? So these are favorites. Eventually we'll start creating our own favorites so that we have them. Here's Maya stuff. Never use any of those. Not never, but pretty much never. And then here's Arnold. So make sure we use Arnold shaders because obviously we want to make sure that this looks as best as it can. If we use a Maya shader, it's crap. We don't want to use that. The reflections won't look right. The coloring won't look right. Everything won't look right. The one that we're going to use, and you can like tattoo this on your arm, is the AI standard surface. Okay? The AI standard surface is basically just the starting point for all the other materials that you would be using. So if you want to create a plastic or a metal or a whatever, that's where you would go. Now what's neat about this, better than Cinema actually, is that you have presets. Cinema doesn't have presets, right? We'll just say no. So what we can do is that if we knew, like, okay, I'm going to be creating a plastic object, I can go through this list and try to find something that is close to plastic, like the word plastic, and I can replace the settings with that. It doesn't get you 100% there, but it does get you closer to being there, okay? Things like reflections and refractions, there's not really any refractions on that, or reflections, color, everything would automatically be updated inside your attribute editor. If you find that you like settings that you've already done on something, you can save your presets, okay? And that's true for most objects inside Maya, which is really awesome. If you have an item here and an item there and you want to copy stuff, you can just save preset, apply a preset, okay? So with this, we basically have something that's like a metal. So I'm going to look through here. This brushed metal looks like it's very close to probably what I want. So I'm just going to hit replace. Okay? So I just went to presets, brushed metal, replace. Now when I render this, it's going to open the Arnold renderer. Now there's two ways that we can render stuff in Arnold. One of them is just this render view. The first one always takes forever. There we go. You can click this render button here and it'll render out just like that. Okay. This is the Maya render view. So in Cinema you had Control R, which would render right in your region. Shift R would pop open a window. Okay. It might be the other way around, or Alt R. No, that's right. Too many programs. Okay, so this is the Maya render view. So that's what that does. If you go to Arnold, you'll see that there's an Arnold render view. And what's neat about this one is that it does update in real time. Once it realizes. There we go. I did the play button. All right, so now it's there. So as I start updating and changing settings here, you'll see that it automatically updates there. Now for me, I'm recording my lecture and I'm working in Maya while I have Substance open, so I will not be using this. So I'm going to hit the stop button and then close it. Okay? I don't want it constantly updating because my computer is going to go super slow. I can close Nuke. I don't really need that open right now. Okay. I'll call this box material. All right, so for my color, I'm going to click on the map button and I'm going to connect a file. Okay, so every time we click on that little map, that's what these things are here, little maps. I can click on file and then I can go to the folder and find, guess which one? Base color, right? I went to the color, I'm loading in base color. Alright, now this is a 4K image, so this is like a huge image, there we go, to load in. I'm going to hit the render button. Now I probably need to adjust my lights before we go any further because we just have the one light. But already you can kind of see how that texture, the same one that we had inside a substance, is now coming through onto the surface. Sweet. Alright, let me add some more lights into my scene. I'm going to go to Arnold Lights. I could create an area light just like I did here, but I'm going to make a, just for now, I'm just going to make a SkyDome. Okay. I'm also going to add in, have one of those. Some software like V-Ray is another rendering engine. That one has a button you can click where it automatically puts a ground in, which is nice. It's just like create ground and then you'll have this infinite ground. Arnold does not have that apparently. There we go. Okay. So now the environment that I have here is basically this big sphere, and it's just going to give me some overall lighting from every direction. Okay? Very similar to what it was doing inside of Substance, except instead of being like an image, it's just one flat color that goes all the way around. Okay? So now, just with color on it, let me jump back to Substance. Oops. There we go. Just with color on it, that's what we're looking at here with some basic shading. Okay? So that's what that is. I'm just going to check one thing real quick. Let's do... Yeah, it always throws me because I'm like, where's that yellow coming from? All right, there's so much reflection on here that I was picking up a lot of that. Okay, so I'm good. Cool. So there's my color. Now, the way that this works inside Maya is in... You really don't have anything like this inside Cinema. You have attributes. You have that little thing in the bottom right where you can go and play with stuff. It's the closest thing to it. So every item inside Maya has history that we talked about, and these little tabs is how we get to and from stuff. So when we click on this, we can go to the far right arrow, and there's that box material that I created. It's important to name it so that we can always get back to it and know exactly what we're trying to look at. So down here under specular, we have weight. So if I crank this weight up and the color up, now we're starting to take longer because now we're having specular, we're having more reflections. Come on. And you'll see that it is going to take a lot longer the more stuff you add to this. There we go. Okay. So we don't really notice a huge difference, There is probably a little bit more reflection happening there. I'm going to save my image, so I'm going to say keep. Cinema, if you remember, it actually always kept your images for you automatically, and Maya does not. So that's one hit against Maya. Roughness, I'm going to click on that, go to File, go to Folder, find my roughness. Again, it's going to take a minute to load. I'm going to take my filter type off. And go back to my color. Click on this arrow. You see, once you connect something, you don't have the box anymore like this. You have the arrow like that. And click there, get back to this tab, and then change that to off. Okay. I could also marquee a box inside here and say just render the region. That way it won't render all this stuff. It'll only render what's inside that box. Alright, so we're definitely seeing a difference here, right? The second I added that roughness to it, what it does is it takes that harsh reflection and now it's softening it in some of those areas. Okay, let's see what else we have. Let's go down to our bump. So way down here under, nope, not advanced. No, geometry, there it is. Under geometry, you go to bump mapping. Okay, now this is going to give it a little bit more depth. The roughness just kind of like feathers out that reflection some. But this bump map will actually give it some thickness. Now for this one, we're not going to go to File. Okay, so color, we went to File. Roughness, we went to File. For a bump map, we have to have something in the middle that's going to talk to it. Okay, so we're going to add what's called a bump 2D. When we type in the word bump here, just like your search engine, it's looking through this list to find bump 2D. Right now, because these are highlighted, it's only looking in these four. So if I click on utilities, which is where I know it's at, there's bump 2D. Okay, now that doesn't add a bump to it because it doesn't know where the bump is. It doesn't know what to bump or how much to bump it. So I'm going to go to where this bump value is and click there, and that's when I'm going to erase this and then click File. Okay, now I can bring in my bump, which is actually a normal. Let me jump back to this just to see. Oops. Yeah, this one doesn't really have a whole lot of bump to it. I should add more to it. I'll go with that one, the DirectX one. Pretty sure that's the right one. Again, I'll take this filter type off. The filter type on here basically is softening the image. If there's any like harsh pixels, it just kind of feathers them. For whatever reason, it's always on. If I want to get back to my texture, I use this arrow here. Okay, this is like your back button to go back to the tab you were just at. So I would say go back. Okay, so there's that bump 2D. There's a bump value where we connected it. I'm not going to use this as a bump. I'm going to use it as a tangent space normal. And then I will render again. Sir. Yes, but Substance doesn't generate displacements. I would have to go to like ZBrush to generate the displacement.
Well, could you use the bump from Substance Painter and then use it in Maya?
As a displacement?
Yeah.
No. The way this is generated is, let me just open this in Photoshop so you can see it. Open both of these. So just pulling this in so we can see it. So this is basically a black and white, or a blue image. The kind of map we would need for a displacement would be a black and white image. Okay? Watch what happens when I do that. I'm going to just desaturate it. right? Because that'll give me a black and white image. Okay. Now, if you look at this, do you see how there's white and there's dark pixels right next to each other? Okay. So there's 3 different kinds of maps. So we have a bump map, which is typically a black and white image, which gives us a fake texture to things. Okay. So like the little pits on the wall, little lines on these walls, we could use a bump map for that. It's not as accurate as a normal map. A normal map takes into account lighting, so it makes it a little bit more realistic looking. A displacement map actually will take the surface and extrude it out. Okay. The displacement map basically sets my gray value at 0.5. So if I go here just to see, make a new layer. So if I go here and I make a desaturated 50%. Okay, so if I make this gray right here, that's like my surface. So pretend that this is my surface, perfectly flat, okay, 50%. Anything that's white is going to bump this way. Anything that's black is going to come this way. Like, not just like look like it is, it physically will bump out and bump there. You could actually take goo. You can actually take low-res geometry, add displacements to it, and make them look much more high-res. So in this case, they have this low-res character. Here is the ZBrush without the displacement, and here's a ZBrush with the displacement. So all of these pieces in the back here, oops, oh my gosh, like all of this detail is actually being bumped out, okay? Now with the way that this is, where we have this happening, I would basically get like little spikes shooting out because they're not nicely blended together. Okay, so I could go into ZBrush, model a high-res character, and then do a displacement on a low-res character. In a perfect world, it would work out perfect, but typically you have to tweak stuff. Okay. Yeah, and then this one, you can see the detail there. I can see the detail there. Basically getting the same thing with both of these. So you could use displacements on these things. They have displacement things available, but just not from substance. Cool. All right, so a little bit of bump on here, not much. What else do we have? Oh, we have our metallic. So if we take this off here, then what should happen is that this doesn't really get affected. Oops. I'm going to speed this up even more. I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to go to options, test resolution, and say 50%. So what that's going to do is instead of rendering at 960, it renders at half size, so it goes quicker. Alright, so let's save that. Here, back up. 100. There we go. Okay, so you can see that metalness difference. And then just to see too, if I take this off and that off, so there's that, there's this one, and then there's that one. So this is what's cool, is that we can just compare before and afters, change some settings, see what happens. Now the metalness should help tint the reflections to the color of whatever it is. So if this is blue, the reflection should be tinted blue. If it wasn't metal, then it would reflect white, okay, or the color of the light. All right. So I'm going to take to this this weight here. I'm going to pull this down, I want that, and I'm going to take this weight and put that file where my metalness was. metallic, not metalness. Okay, and again, I'll go over here once it loads and say off. All right, so now I've gotten something that's pretty close to what we had in Substance. Again, we're not going to get the same exact look in here because we don't have that surface, that HDR in the background, okay? So let's grab one and see what we can do with it. So if I go to SIBL HDRI, okay, here's another website to write down, SIBL HDRI. Or you can just write HDR Labs, whichever is easier to remember. Okay, so this is a free resource for HDRs. You can obviously grab stuff from other websites. These ones are free. Probably had the discussion last semester or whenever you took the last class of 3D stuff about taking textures and why we use textures.com because it's royalty-free stuff. These are all royalty-free, so I can use these, put stuff in my demo reel using these, and I don't get fined or anything. Okay, these ones are free. Somewhere in this website they have ones that you pay for. There's a promo, yeah, okay. So I'm just going to find something that I want to put in there. So let's say that I have my cube instead of the Desert Highway. It's the best one. So I'm going to take that zip file and paste it into my source images and then just extract it to Desert Highway. And so we can look at it better, I'm going to open up Nuke again. Nuke is actually a pretty quick program just to open stuff, working on things. It's only when you get into like the more complicated stuff that it starts to really slow down. All right, so here's what we get. So we get a an IBL. That's what's going to link this into the Sybil plugin if you have the plugin. You don't need the plugin. You can get the plugin. And what's cool is that you hit the button and it sets everything else up for you. You don't have to worry about setting it up. But then you get these things. All right, so let's look at these. So again, I'm just going to, I'm going to hit L, that lays everything out nice. Lays everything out nice. And I'm going to hit 1 here. So this one is a thumbnail. So this is basically just a little image. If you had the plugin, it would show that as a thumbnail. Not a huge deal. This is an 8K 360. Okay. So if you look at this number up here, it's 8,000 pixels wide by 4,000 pixels tall. Okay, and the way that they shoot this is they go into that desert spot, they stand with the camera and they spin around and take a bunch of pictures, then they point the camera up and take a bunch of pictures, and they point the camera up and take a bunch of pictures. Same thing down. They pack all those pictures together, okay? Now, this is just a JPEG. So this is an 8-bit image. So that's as far as that goes. Let me scoot that over, scoot this over. This is a preview of that same thing we just saw, okay? So this is at 8,000 by 4,000. This is a preview of that 8,000 by 4,000. You can see the resolution is completely different, right? Okay, so it's just a thumbnail. We have a blurry version of this. Not really high resolution, 360 by 180. And then we have this guy, 1600 by 800. Notice the file format is an HDR. Of all the files that are in here, if I go to details, oops, there it is. This one here is probably, besides the 8K one, probably the next biggest file. Okay, this is basically those images that they have, but with all the settings and all the information stacked into it. Okay, so if you were out there and you took a picture like that in the desert, you see how you can barely see, oops, you can barely see the sun right there. If I start pulling this down, I can actually see a lot more of the sun. Now this isn't just taking like the levels down or adjusting the color like that. They actually took a picture like this. And they took a picture probably like that also. Okay? And the HDR stacks all of these together. That's what makes it so awesome. So we can actually use this for reflections, use it for lighting and stuff. Okay. Now this one, typically you would use this for reflections because you want high resolution detail in your reflections. This one we would typically use for our lighting, okay? Because if you blur it a little bit, the lighting becomes a little bit softer and a little bit more realistic looking. If the lighting is too harsh, these lines on the road may actually pick up as lighting sources, okay? Because it's basically using the white values of it to light your scene. Now here's another thing to pay attention to. Look at these numbers here, the red, green, and blue values, okay? Typically, if you're in Photoshop, your numbers are going to go from 0 to, does anyone know? 255, okay? If you're red, green, and blue. So it goes 0 to 255. In this is going to go from 0 to 1, typically. If I click on this and I move my mouse around, do you see how it's none of these are getting anywhere near 1? This one is kind of close. And you'll see it's actually a little bit above 1. Okay? That's an HDR. If I go to the JPEG, I'm right inside the middle of the sun, and you'll see that it's 0.94, 0.98, 0.99. Let me go back to this one. Let me go right into the sun. Look at the values there. 34, 34, and 35. Okay? This is what is so cool about HDRs is that a JPEG only has so much information. You can only store 255 different values of red, green, and blue. Okay? Just for fun. It's actually 256 because you're counting 0 also. Times. Okay. So that's how many different colors you can have in an 8-bit image. 16,700,000 and blah, blah, blah. Okay? Just say 16 million. So you can have 16 million colors with a regular JPEG. With an HDR, it's unlimited. Okay? It's like 32-bit, but it's more than you'll ever need. So you can actually store decimal point values inside there. So you can have colors that range from actually like negative values to stuff that ranges in the hundreds or even thousands. Okay? And the point of it is that it helps your scene become more realistic. So we'll be going to sites like Symbol Archive, we'll be going to Google, searching stuff, using KeyShot, using the ones in Substance. But then we'll start creating our own so that we can basically, if I want to put something in the hallway, like I model a car and I want to put the car in the hallway, I have the HDR for it. I have a background plate. We could even do video, so we can have a video of that hallway and then put the car right in it, and the video and the car and everything will match up. It's awesome. Okay, so that's what's super cool about these HDRs. Okay, they help us make stuff look more photorealistic. And what's super cool about Nuke is that we can actually make a sphere. And then here's 3D inside Nuke, and I can actually look around. Let me tab that. Click off, come on. Just select. There we go. Alright, so right here, this is where the person was standing when they shot the film. And this is back in the day when they had, the technology was not as good. Now you have a single camera, well, 3 cameras or 2 cameras in one. You hit a button and it automatically will capture everything. That's pretty sweet. Back to Maya. Okay, cool. All right, so some software will actually have spots inside of their render settings. I kind of went past right there. This little gear with the clapper is your render settings. Okay. So inside Arnold, there is a common tab. So just like Cinema, you have basic settings. These settings will be the same box for every single rendering engine you use inside Maya. So whether it's Mental Ray, Arnold, RenderMan, whatever, this box typically stays the same. So you don't have to worry about that box changing. Depending on what you want to set up will be what kind of file comes out of RenderMan or of Arnold, the compression that it's using, the color space, the name.number.extension stuff if you're doing an animation, the frame range, the camera you're using, and then obviously the important one is our resolution. Okay, so if we're doing a still image in here, you have your cheat cards. we're doing 2400 by 3000 pixels. So that's an 8 by 10. Okay? That's not terribly big. The items up there were 8 by 10, the bigger ones. We also have specific ones. So past this tab, everything else is now specific to Arnold. Way at the top, you'll see Arnold. Here's Maya software, here's Maya hardware, here's Maya vector, here's Arnold. If you get a few minutes, check out Maya vector. It's got some cool stuff in there where you could actually render out your images to look like they're cartoony, look like they're stylized. It's neat. Okay, so inside this tab, you'll see that we have sampling. Okay, so remember back when we were talking about Iray, when we were talking about cinema, sampling was what is going to make our stuff look better. The more samples, typically, the better definition you're going to have, or the better quality. So the way that this works is Arnold, that's the program we're in, Arnold has it set up for specific things. Okay, so depending on where your low quality is, you can crank that up. So if you see that your camera's anti-aliasing, which is those edge pixels are all blocky, you can pull that up. Now look up here where it says total no lights 117. If I set this to 4, it just doubled that. Okay, so now I'm getting not one more sample, I'm doubling the amount of samples that I put there. Okay, so you have to be aware not to go too crazy on these settings, because as you do, it's just going to cascade and make it like incredibly slow renders. Okay, some other stuff down there we'll get into. Atmosphere, environment, ray depth. Okay, more stuff that we'll eventually get into. They all have their own kind of set of tools that they are inside here. It helps to look through them, see what's in there. Here's system stuff. Don't really need to play with that. Here's AOVs. So in the Benjamin buttons, you saw they would show his head, and his head would be like different colors, right? It was like a flat color, then it was like this multi-rainbow color, and then whatever, black and white. These are auxiliary output values. Yeah, I believe that's what that stands for. So what they do is they output different channels for our stuff. So just like we're in Substance here, and we're exporting out the base color, the height, the roughness, and the metallic and all that, that's what these allow us to do for our complete render. So what might happen is you render your stuff out and you're like, ooh, I don't like the shadows. I want to adjust them. Instead of re-rendering the whole thing, you can just adjust the shadows on this pass. Instead of adjusting your color in Maya and then re-rendering it, you can adjust it after. Okay, so we'll get more into these. There's a whole bunch of different passes that we can put in here. There's Z, which is the Z depth. You don't have to do this for this assignment, but I'm just going to show it to you so you can see it. Here's albedo, which should be our ambient occlusion. Here's diffuse. We don't need to worry about that. All right, that should be good. Okay, so I'm just going to add those two in there. Okay, that should be good. That should be good. Cool. All right. So I need to find a spot to put that HDR in. All right. Now, the easiest way to put one in there is if we check out the lights. Sometimes they'll have a spot here, right? So if I go to photometric light, if I go to physical sky, light portal, sometimes one of these will have it. So I'm going to double check. I believe the SkyDome allows me to use a texture. Maybe. Nope, that's something else. Well, I'm just going to use this here anyway. All right, so I'm going to go to the color of my SkyDome and click on File and load in that image. Desert Highway, Desert Highway. And because I'm using this for reflections, I'm going to load in this one. Okay, that reflection HDR. Now we'll probably see that this is maybe a little bit too sharp reflections, because it's also going to be using some, it's going to be using part of it for lighting also, but we'll see. We'll adjust it. And I should have pulled this over. I think I have time, so I'm going to hit escape. There we go. Oops. That's why it's taking so long, because I already set this to 2400. I don't want to do that yet. I'm going to say maintain. We'll just hit this at 1200 or 800. There we go. All right, so now we're getting something, again, a little bit closer to what we had inside of Substance. Cool. All right. That's good. Now, if I go to my folder again, I go to Images, I go to Temp. Remember I said anything we bring into Maya is going to go into source images. Anything that comes out of Maya is going to go into images. So whenever we do a regular render, it saves it. So that way, in case we ever need to get back and tweak it, modify it, look at it, whatever, we can do that. So here is my albedo, here's my beauty, and here is my Z, okay? The beauty is what we just saw. It's the color pass, it's the RGB. I'm going to go back to Nuke so we can see this again. And I'm just going to import it. And I should be able to just grab these folders. Oops. And drag that in there. Yep, there we go. And that's a nice thing too. You can just drag the folders and it comes right in. So here is my beauty pass, just like the color. Here is this pass. That probably needs to have some of the settings tweaked. And then this is my depth. Okay. So now this is what we could do depth of field with, which is awesome. So you can't see it here, right? But if I take these settings and I pull this down, now you can actually see that the geometry is sitting inside here. All right, so I can take this, and I'm just gonna do a little bit of ZBrush stuff just so you can, or Nuke stuff so you can see it. I'm going to say, copy this into here. Copy the red channel into the depth. There we go. All right, I'm going to hiccup for a second. And I'm going to go to Z to focus. And this is what is cool about doing stuff like depth of field in post, is that we can basically set it up after the fact. We don't have to do this right away. Dang it. Spacebar, there we go. So by just adding or just rendering out that Z channel and then just coming in here and just doing a couple quick operations, I basically set up this depth of field. And what's cool about it is that because it's in post, I could animate it if I needed to. So you see how I just move this point and now that's in focus. I move it here, now that's in focus. If I go over to these settings, I can take the depth of field up more. I can take the maximum blur up more. It'll go crazy. Too much. Okay, so I have a lot more abilities in post to start tweaking things if I render out the right channels. For this first assignment, don't worry about it. I just wanted you to see that we can do that. Okay. Now another thing about reflections, because it'll probably happen, your reflections are a matter of bounciness. Okay. So when we look at this object, the camera is here, it hits that side of the surface and then bounces off, and then whatever is on this side, that's what the reflection's picking up. Okay? So if you don't see your reflection, you may have to change your angle. You may have to modify what you're looking at. You may have to even go into here, Control A to get to the attribute editor, and you may have to take some of your settings up. I'm going to take that Metalness up some. So now I'm getting more of a reflection of that sun over here on the side. I could also take that environment and I could rotate it around so that I get different views of what is in the background. Okay, sweet. All right, so just to summarize what we did. Okay, because I went over some stuff that I want you to do and some stuff that's just bonus stuff. You export your textures from here. So once you've gone through Maya, you've modeled your simple object, cut out the UVs, brought it into Substance and made something cool, you export your textures out. We chose just the default one with no alpha. We picked our folder, we set it to be a ping, set this to 4000, sent it out. Inside Maya, we assigned under right-click, assign new material, this AI standard surface. We connected the color to the color. We connected the metallic to the weight. We connected the roughness to the roughness. We created a bump map here for the file. And we changed that to, back one, tangent space normal. I don't need to worry about that now. I took my environment that's out here and I just mapped to this, that HDR file that I found. We can also take the intensity up, so if we did decide we wanted it brighter or dimmer, we could do that. I had a light in here already. You may need to add another light. You may need to add something just to make it feel like it has more of a shadow on it. I also need to give my ground a texture too. That's why, if I come back to here, that's why the ground does not look nice in this rendering, because the ground is not an Arnold shader, and that object is. Okay, so that's important. New material, shader, AI standard surface. There we go. And for this, I would basically just use a flat image or a flat texture. So I'm just going to go to plastic, and then I'll just take the specular weight off and take the color to white. There we go. Now, if I see that this is too dark, then I could add another light to help bounce that in there. There we go. I could also grab this background, hit Control A to get back in here, and I could tell it, where would you be? Viewport, no. Use color temperature. No. Oh, visibility in the camera. There we go. So I can turn off the visibility in the camera so that it physically won't render, but it'll still be part of all that stuff. If you look at this, that's what's happening. We're not seeing that texture in the background. We're just seeing the object. And then I really don't even need this ground here. There we go. So now we have our object floating in space. Gorgeous. Okay. So now that we have that, then I can go to my render settings. I'm going to crank this back up to whichever direction yours seems to make more sense. Mine's square, so 2400 by 3000 doesn't matter. Go either way. I'll probably add one more sample to my camera AA, just because I can see a little bit of fuzziness happening on the edges. That should be good there. I'm going to turn my filter type to different ones. I'm going to leave it at Gaussian. There's other ones that I use typically, and those are not listed, so I'll just use that. Cool. All right. And I'll also make sure that my test resolution is back to render settings, and then I hit the render button, and now it's going to go. Okay. So I would save my scene, render this out, and then you should have, by the end of this, you should have an image ready to go. So you'll have your scene that has your final image in, or your final scene in here that we were just working on. In your source images, you have all your textures. And then inside your temp folder, you'll most likely have an image inside there. Okay. Now mine's going to take a bit because now I'm going 2400 by 3000, so it's going to take some time for that to render out. When it does, it'll most likely delete the one that's already in here because it's the same file and format or frame and everything, so it'll just get rid of that. Okay? Any questions? Not yet. We'll have some probably. All right.